Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Behind the Scenes Worship Podcast. My name is Soraya Scott, and today we are going to be talking about things I'm not afraid to admit as a worship leader. So a couple of months ago, there was a trend on TikTok where people were sharing things that they weren't afraid to admit. And of course, I had to do one for worship leaders, and I thought it would make for a good podcast episode as well. So here are two things I'm not afraid to admit as a worship leader. Number one, I am so tired of the choir versus praise team debate. Both are necessary, both have an important role in our services, and here are the reasons why I say that. So, number one, let's just talk about and let's just be real that the people who keep hollering about bring the choir back get on my nerves, okay? Because where did the choir go? There are still choirs alive and well, and if you want to hear choir, there's plenty out there. They have not gone anywhere. Like currently, one of my favorite choirs to listen to is Vincent Bohannon and SOOOO. You got Ricky Dillard and New G, who is a staple and still releasing new music and new albums. And then as a throwback, right, I also still love to listen to the Mississippi Mass Choir. And then not to mention the local church still has very active choirs. So if you want a choir so bad, go find one. Stop writing comments on Facebook and go find the choir you are looking for. And I'm convinced the people who say, bring the choir back and they miss this and they miss that are either saying it just to get affirmation because it's a hot topic, or they attend a church that doesn't have a choir. And if that's the case, if having a choir is that important to you, then go find a church that has one. Or I think they say it because they don't attend a church at all. Because what are you even talking about? Number two, it's also those same people who are yelling, bring the choir back, who aren't willing to be in the choir themselves. Like, you want this choir, but you aren't willing to contribute to it. You aren't willing to come to rehearsals. You aren't willing to learn the songs. You aren't willing to commit, but you want everybody else to do it just to appease you. And the crazy part is that while you're pushing for a choir, the praise team, who you're tired of hearing, are going to be the main ones holding down the choir. So what are we really accomplishing here? Number three, I do think that choirs aren't as prevalent now, not because anybody has anything against choirs, like people, keep trying to portray, but because people just aren't committed anymore. If we're honest, the local church choirs were kind of dwindling pre-COVID, but after COVID, they were literally non-existent because of social distancing and stuff like that. Now, I know some choirs were being rebellious and still kept singing and spreading COVID and whatever, but for the most part, most choirs stopped. And the reality is that for some churches, they have fully recovered. There are some choirs that I like to follow on TikTok, that are, local churches, and they have fully recovered. But then there are some churches who unfortunately have not recovered from COVID. And so for every church that has a fully stacked choir, there's at least 2 churches who are barely making it with 5 singers who can't hold their voice part well on a good day. But on a real note, and this is point number 4, that I think after COVID, people realized that it's okay to not serve somewhere until death. We have this really bad, especially in the Black church community, where it's custom to serve in the same department or position until you die. But COVID made people realize that even if they don't serve, the church and they themselves will live, and God will not strike them down for not serving in the same place that they always have. Number 5, when I say that both teams and choirs are necessary and both play a role, I mean that the praise team and the choir speak to different aspects or layers of our services. So, for example, having a team creates an environment where congregants can, as Dr. Judith McAllister says in her book, Mom and Pop, Minister of Music, Pastor of the People, People can take ownership of their worship and foster an environment where the presence of God can dwell and move among his people. Teams accomplish this by singing songs that are simple in melody, harmony, and words so the congregation can sing along in the moment. They can also accomplish this by singing directly to God or about God. Now, number 6, on the choir side, when a choir sings choir songs, of course people can sing along to them if they know them, but it's not always a song that can be picked up in a service like a praise and worship song can be. This leads to congregations not taking ownership, but instead just enjoying what they hear. And teams are limited in a sense of what songs they can do, but choirs aren't limited. They can sing the most complicated to the most simplest of songs. They can sing on a wide variety of topics that don't have to solely be focused on God, but can be more horizontal in nature, where they encourage and uplift the congregation. Of course, this can lead to God dwelling and moving among his people, but I think we have to be honest with ourselves at times on if it's God moving or if it's emotionalism because somebody knew how to drive the song, or we really just like when the choir sings that particular song. But lastly, at the end of the day, teams and choirs both play a significant role in our services, and we shouldn't have to choose between the two. Now, the second thing I'm not afraid to admit is a quote by Dr. Miles Monroe from his book, The Purpose and Power of Praise and Worship. And he says, "Be careful not to come expecting something great in your public praise and worship if you haven't had an individual meeting with God first." So here are my thoughts on this. Number 1, this quote, this statement is true for both leaders and congregations alike. Number 2, leaders, we can't rely on church cliches, although there is truth to them, but we can't rely on church cliches to get us through, right? We can't rely on riffs and runs, squalling, and somebody else's anointing to move the heart of God. How will we know when he's speaking or moving if we don't know what he sounds like, if we don't know what he feels like or what he looks like? How can we know what to sing or what to say in a moment if we haven't consulted with him first? How will we know how to best minister to his heart or to his people if we haven't consulted with him yet? Vocal abilities can only do so much and get us so far, but it's our time with God that makes the difference. And number 3, for leaders as well. It's time out for not spending time with God, just getting up dry and then fussing and complaining that the people didn't come to worship. Most of them, they do come to worship, but they have enough discernment to tell that you weren't where you needed to be. So basically, they don't trust you to lead them because where are you taking them? So number 4, this quote, like I said, applies to the congregation as well, because the congregation has a responsibility to be seeking God and spending time with him on their own before coming to corporate worship. It's, almost like congregations expect the worship leader to do everything. We literally have to do backflips sometimes in order to get a little participation, which then slips into entertainment. Why are leaders hooping and hollering for people to stand? Because unless they get aggressive, hardly anybody moves voluntarily. So number 5, something that I recognize is that, every time someone comes to service, they, won't always feel like praising and worshiping. Like, I get it, but trust me when I say that the worship leader doesn't always feel like it either. Life gets hard and heavy for everybody, but an individual meeting with God will remind you that in spite of what you're going through and experiencing, God is still worthy of praise and worship, whether you feel like giving it to him or not. Life circumstances doesn't change his worth, but realizing this takes maturity in God. Number 6, both leaders and congregations have to invest time into individual meetings with God, not just to experience Him in corporate settings, but just to experience Him in private as well. We can't seek Him just because we don't want to embarrass ourselves in public. We can't just seek Him because we really want to sing good for the applause of people. I remember that there was a time when I would pray for help just so I would sing well in front of people, and I would feel bad and think that God wouldn't bless me if I didn't pray. But He convicted me and told me that first, it wasn't going to be my works like praying just to pray that was going to get Him to move. My motives for prayer needed to be purified. And of course, we know that there are benefits to prayer, but the benefits can't be the only reason we're seeking the Lord. Number 7, so personally, I have found that there is nothing like spending time with God privately. I can spend as much time as I want with Him without worrying about a clock, my voice cracking. I can hit wrong notes without judgment in private. I can be as ugly as I want while crying in private. I don't have to worry about leading anyone but myself in worship when it's done privately. It's a totally free space that is so sweet. And I think about this often because once I experienced that type of sweet private encounter with the Lord, I couldn't get enough of it. I literally desired being in His presence. So I remember in college on the campus of Oral Roberts University in Tulsa, Oklahoma, going to the prayer tower before and after class. Any free moment I had to have those private encounters with God, I would take them. And I was content with just spending time with God. I didn't feel any different, when it came to leading. But whenever I would lead with Souls of Fire, people would be like, "Oh my gosh, you're so anointed and powerful." And I would just be like, "Thank you," because I truly didn't feel any different. But there was a change that people could see that came as a result of spending time with God privately. Point number 8. I'm in a different season of life now that requires my time to be spent differently because I'm a wife and a mom, which means I'm not always able to have those private, secret place moments with God. And I felt so bad, like I was neglecting Him. But He told me that the moments I'm praying and singing to Him while washing dishes or folding clothes or sweeping the floor or even driving to the store still count. Even if I can't kneel or bow down because I'm holding a crying baby, my prayers still reach Him. Even if I have to pray and sing with my children listening, not only does that teach them how to pray and about Jesus, but those moments count too. Lastly, I would say individual meetings with God can look different depending on what your life is like, and they are so important because it does make your public praise and worship impactful, but then it also makes the private praise and worship just as impactful. So those are the 2 things that I am not afraid to admit as a worship leader. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode.